We are officially about halfway through the year, which means that it is time to do the Mid-Year Freakout Book Tag, which is one of the most popular book tags here on BookTube, and it's one that I really like listening to people talk about because it gives a pretty good summary of how your reading year is going so far and also for goals looking ahead for the rest of the year. Before we get right into the questions, I am going to provide some brief statistics about some of the books that I have read so far this year. So I have read about 62 books so far. This has mainly been novels, but also some short stories and manga as well. Most of these books have been fantasy. There have also been some science fiction as well as memoirs and some contemporary romance books as well, but I would say largely I have read fantasy, which is pretty consistent because fantasy is my favorite genre. Alright, so the first question of course is, what is the best book that you have read so far for this year? And for me, this is a bit of a hard question, but also one that does kind of have a very clear answer, as there is only one singular book that I have given a 5-star rating to this year, and that book is Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. I loved the Hunger Games series. I read it when I was a kid and around the time that the films first came out, so the Hunger Games series holds a really special place in my heart. I actually reread the series, I think maybe 2 years ago, so a bit of a ways away from reading this one, but I still felt like the events of the book series are really fresh in my mind. I did also really like the other prequel book in the Hunger Games series, which is called The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I have not yet seen the movie for that, though I've heard some people have some mixed opinions both on the book and the movie. I really enjoyed the book. I really liked how Suzanne Collins kind of explored the mentality of a character like President Snow, especially from his perspective, like growing up within the capitalite society that we haven't gotten a lot of details in before. And this one, Sunrise and the Reaping, my feelings are quite the same. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I read it within the span of 24 hours, and it was a really emotional roller coaster type of book because this one is following Haymitch, who is the mentor of Katniss Everdeen, who was our main character in the Hunger Games trilogy. However, we already know about Haymitch's backstory given that he is a main character in the Hunger Games trilogy, so a lot of the events that are happening in this book are ones where we already know the answer to what ends up happening, which makes reading this book a really emotional journey because the Hunger Games is about children being forcefully put into a games where they have to kill each other. And so knowing what happens at the end and reading this book knowing that all of these characters that you're getting to know are going to die is quite an emotional thing. This book also went really into detail about the sort of spread of propaganda, specifically by the capital-like government, which I think has a lot of mirrors to our own societal norms, especially nowadays when, there is a lot of political instability going on in various parts of the world and also a lot of government regimes pushing propaganda towards us. So I feel like this book is really relevant, which is why I could not give it under 5 stars. There were some parts that I wasn't fully in love with in terms of the actual narrative, but I do think the overall message and the care and compassion that Suzanne Collins has for the themes that she's discussing, and also her compassion for the characters as they're undergoing these really difficult and tumultuous events happening to them, just makes it such a stellar book in my opinion that not be right to give it under 5 stars. So this one is by far one of the best books that I have read this year, and also just one of the best books that I've read in general. Some others that I did really enjoy that I probably will talk about more from some of the other questions are A Rivalry of Hearts by Tessonja Odette. This one I thought was super fun and really enjoyable. And then another one that I really enjoyed was The Serpent and the Wolf by Rebecca Robinson, romantasy book that I didn't really have the highest expectations going into, but did end up really enjoying it and really enjoyed the fresh take on both romantasy and a uniquely built magic system that I feel like a lot of romantasy books lack. The next question is, what is the best sequel book that you have read this year? And I have 2 for this, and actually interestingly both of these books are sequels to books that I have also read the first book in this year. I don't have physical copies of either of these 2 books. I read them both as audiobooks, but for the first one, I'm going to hold up the first book in that, and it is The Ragpicker King, which is the sequel to Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. I actually enjoyed The Ragpicker King more than I liked Swordcatcher so far, which I was kind of interested by, I guess, because sequels tend to be like hit or miss for me, and I did also really enjoy Swordcatcher. However, I felt like The Ragpicker King sort of improved upon a lot of the issues that I had with Swordcatcher, particularly regarding its pacing. I think that the pacing for The Ragpicker King was a lot better in terms of the story was a lot more fluid. This one, I felt like first like 200 pages of this was sort of just spent providing background details and like world building to get to the actual story, whereas I felt like The Ragpicker King had a continuous story throughout it, even though there was some pacing issues with it as well, but I don't think it was as bad as Swordcatcher was. To give a brief summary of this series, the first book, Swordcatcher, is following these two characters named Kel and Connor. Kel is the sword catcher or body double for Connor, who is the Prince of Castellane, pretends to be a distant cousin of the royal family despite the fact that he has no royal blood himself. There is also a secondary character named Lancaster, who is a member of a discriminated minority group called the Ashkari, and she is a physician that is recruited by the palace to sort of help out some of the people in the household who need assistance. Her grandfather is also one of the advisors to the king as well, so she has a lot of connections to the royal court. I just really like the world building in this. The politics and the plot lines are really interesting. Cassandra Clare is an author that I have loved for a long time. I started reading her books back in, I think, 2013. Another sequel that I really enjoyed was the book Dating and Dragons by Kristy Boyce. The first book in the series, Dungeons and Drama, and these two are both like contemporary high school romances that have some aspect that has to do with D&D or Dungeons and Dragons. These are just like very nerdy based books, and I just really enjoyed both of the like main characters and main couples within these two books. I think they're just like characters that I would have loved reading about when I was younger, and I hope that there are other kids out who are able to pick up this series and see that more positive representation for nerdy characters, especially nerdy girl characters, because I feel like a lot of the media that was popular around the time that I was younger really shamed people for having these nerdy interests. So I really enjoyed these books, and I also think they both did a really good job at delving in deeply into some difficult topics that in a way that is still appropriate for a younger audience. The next question was, what are some new releases that you would still like to get to? First book is Four Ruined Realms by Corland. This is the sequel to the book Five Broken Blades, which I actually read this year as well, and I really enjoyed it. I'm going to talk about it more for one of the later questions, but this one is following a ragtag group of mercenaries who are forced to go on this quest to basically assassinate the evil tyrannical king. I really liked how both the plot line and the romances, as well as the characters as individuals, were developed by this author, so I'm really excited to get to the second one. The third book in this series, which is called Three Shattered Souls, has also come out as well, so I'm really anticipating getting to this one because I love the first one, and the third one is already out as well. Another one that I'm really anticipating, and this one just came in a couple days ago, is The Enchanted Greenhouse by Beth Durst. This is the kind of like unofficial sequel slash spin-off to The Spell Shop, which is a cozy fantasy where we're following a main character who opens up a illegal spell shop basically in her hometown, and this one is kind of following a character that was mentioned in that book but never appeared in it, so I am intrigued to see like where Beth Durst goes with building this world and also developing these new characters. Another one that I cannot wait to get to is The Nightshade God by Whitten. This is the third book in the Nightshade Crown trilogy, which I believe initially was slated to be a duology, but I really loved the first book, which is called The Foxglove King. This was one of my favorite books that I believe I read in 2023, and I read it at kind of a difficult point in my life, and I just really connected to these characters, especially our main character Lore and some of the struggles that she goes through. This is also based around sort of the Ancien regime of French history, so there's a lot of really interesting world building and also a really cool magic system that is based around life and death that I think is really interesting. So I'd like to continue and finish off this series, which is kind of crazy. I hate finishing series, but I'm still excited to see how the story concludes and what happens to our characters, which I hope that is good. Cruel is the Light. This one is by Sophie Clark. This was the January Fairy Loot book, so I really need to get to it because January was a long time ago and I was really anticipating this book. It's a really nice edition, and it's basically following like an exorcist training academy that's set in the Vatican, and like all of those things sound really interesting to me. Another one, this was the Fairy Loot pick in February. This is the Rose Bargain. It's basically Bridgerton meets The Selection and The Cruel Prince is what I've heard. There's basically like a competition to marry the fairy son of the Queen of England. All of that just seems amazing. The Cruel Prince is one of my favorite series of all time, and I also really like the Bridgerton Netflix series, so I am really excited to get to this one. It is also a really stunning edition again. The next question is, what are some of your most anticipated releases for the rest of the year? And I have 3 big ones. The first one is probably the one that I'm most excited for, and it is Empire of the Dawn, which is the 3rd book in the Empire of the Vampire series by Jace Kristoff. This is a very dark and gritty fantasy series, but it is one of the best fantasy series I think I have ever read. We're following a main character named Gabriel de Leon, who is a member of the Order of Silver Saints, who are the sons of vampiric fathers and human mothers, basically are blessed with some of the gifts of their vampire fathers and use those gifts to hunt down vampires who have now in this world taken over the world. This series is so good and so big, and I just love the world building in it. It's very dark, very gritty, and just really gruesome, but it's probably some of the best like world building and history that I've read since like the Game of Thrones series, which I read over a decade ago. I cannot endorse this series enough. It's so good, and I'm really looking forward to see how it ends and also what is happening to our characters, because I'm really attached to these characters and just desperately need to know. Another one that I'm looking forward to is the book Alchemized by Senlin Yu. This is the very popular Hermione fanfiction Manacled, which I've been hearing about like since the whole Hermione like blew up. I think around 2020 is when it had like a big resurgence. I've never been too big of a fanfic reader, so I didn't hear about Manacled until around this time, but I think the concepts and themes that this book is playing with do seem really intriguing to me, and I have been waiting to pick it up for this published edition to come out, mainly because I want to see how the author goes about developing this world and making the lore and characters her own as opposed to the ones belonging to the original series. And another one that I'm looking forward to is the book Arcana Academy by Elise Kova. I really like Elise Kova's Married to Magic series, and I've been really anticipating Arcana Academy coming out because I love her books, and I also just think that she's a really like inspirational figure within the author community because she is a self-published author who has written so many books and is now getting traditionally published and is having these big releases. So I'm really hoping that this book will allow her to have more success within traditional publishing and also within online communities, bringing more attention to her other books as well, because I feel like she's just, I think, really deserves that success and someone that I'm happy to support. Now, the next question is one that can be a bit controversial, but it's also one that I think I'm most excited to answer. And the question is, what are your biggest disappointments for this year? And I'm gonna start it off with one that is either going to make people go, yes, that one is super disappointing, or people are gonna get really mad, because I find that this book is very polarizing, and it is When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. I recently did a reading wrap-up where I talked more in depth about my feelings about this book and why I didn't like it, but I actually was enjoying it a lot when I had first picked it up. I thought there was a solid story, and I quite enjoyed our main character, and I thought there was some interesting world building details. females. But as the book went on, it just got worse and worse and worse. The writing just got more overdone and overwritten, and the characters were changing in ways that I think was impactful negatively, like especially through the romance. I felt like the main male character was very controlling of the female main character, and that she was changing a lot to better suit his beliefs and sort of views of how she should be. And this was also being framed in a more positive light, because it was like, you know, he's saying that he's supporting her ability to make her own choices, but it really didn't seem that way to me. I also just think that the storyline, the author just really did not seem to know what she was doing with this book, and I think that is further proven by the fact that I later found out that apparently the second book in this series was initially supposed to be this book, and the second book were supposed to be the same story, as in the same book, despite the fact that both of them are about 600 pages long. Another one that was a big disappointment, and this one was especially a big disappointment because it was a sequel to a book that I did enjoy, and that's Rebel Witch by Kristy Cicerelli. The first book in the series is called The Crimson Moth, or Heartless Hunter, depending on if you're US or UK. And I quite enjoyed the first book. It tells a really interesting story about, you know, this world in which there are witches who are discriminated against, who used to be in power and used to use that power to harm people. So the witch society was overthrown, and now witches are persecuted in this world, and we're following a main character who is a witch vigilante who spends her days saving witches from the hunters who are killing them, and she ends up falling in love with one of the hunters who she has some connections to through one of her friends. This one, I feel like, just threw every single good thing about the first book away. The first book had a pretty solid storyline going for it, as well as some pretty solid character work as well, whereas this one, I feel like, just threw the storyline and the characters out the window to uplift the really lackluster romance between the two of them, and I felt like it was just sort of playing into popular tropes on Book Talk and BookTube, as opposed to actually telling a compelling and unique narrative, which I felt was more so true of the first book. Another disappointment was Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. I feel like this is one of the most hyped and most talked about books that I see. Was really disappointed in this book. A lot of people say that it's a very confusing book, and I concur with that statement. However, I feel like the confusion that I had with this book was rather because the author did a terrible job at explaining what was going on in the story and explaining the mentality of her characters and really just anything about the story in general. The next question asks, what was the biggest surprise for this year? And for me, that book was Five Broken Blades by Mike Corland. I talked about this one a bit before when I mentioned the sequel to it. I expected to enjoy it, but I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did, largely because I've heard some pretty negative reviews about it, largely directed towards the romantic relationships in this book. Some people didn't really feel like the romance was as well developed, and as a result of there being such a focus on the romance, that the world building and also plotline of the book wasn't as well developed, and maybe the marketing around this book was a bit maybe confusing for some people, because I feel like it is sort of straddling the line between being a romantasy book and being a regular fantasy book as well, that I think maybe for a lot of people was a bit confusing, especially because this is a Red Tower or Entangled publication book, which is also the same company that has done very popular books like Fourth Wing, for example. So I think people had a much higher expectation for the romance, or had more romance-oriented or romantasy-oriented expectations for this book, and perhaps it just didn't fully deliver on those expectations. Another big surprise was the book The Serpent and the Wolf by Rebecca Robinson. I unexpectedly really enjoyed the storyline and also the romance in this. I think this was one of the more refreshing romantasy books that I have read, in terms of how well developed its romance is, and also how well the two characters do at actually coming to know one another, as opposed to just fall in lust, so to speak, with one another. I genuinely felt like there was a strong connection between the two of them, and that both of them within this partnership still remained their own separate people with their own forms of identities and belonging. I also think the politics in this world detailed were really well done. I find with a lot of romantasy books, there's political elements that are just not well done at all, and I feel like this one, the author actually did their research on how politics could function within the society that she is building, and I'm really excited to see how this series continues. And sort of similarly, favorite new authors. A lot of the authors that I mentioned have been new authors to me, so Corland is one of them. I really enjoyed this book and I hope to read the rest of them. I am a bit hesitant to say that authors are favorite authors until I've read multiple of their books, but Corland is one that I'm interested in reading more from. Another author that I'm interested in reading more from is Tessonja Odette, who is the author of A Rivalry of Hearts, which I mentioned briefly at the beginning. Has written a lot of like fantasy romance type books that I feel like sort of explore the fantasy romance genre in really unique and interesting way. She has a lot of fairy tale retellings, which are some of my more favorite like tropes in romantasy, so I'm very excited to continue reading. Another new favorite author is Kristy Boyce, who is the author of the Dungeons and Drama and also Dating and Dragons books, which I both really enjoyed. Lastly, Rebecca Robinson is another one that I really enjoyed. She wrote The Serpent and the Wolf, so I'm very excited too. The next question is newest fictional crushes, and me, even though I read a lot of romance and romantasy books, I don't tend to develop crushes on those characters. I more so just am interested in the dynamic between the characters as individuals. A lot of my crushes, like fictional crushes, tend to be more so on video game characters like Astarion from Baldur's Gate or Alistair from Dragon Age are two that I adore wholeheartedly. I also love a lot of the characters from the Fire Emblem video game series as well, largely because you're sort of playing as the character who is romancing them, so I think that's why I kind of tend to have romantic or crushes on them as opposed to characters from books. But I do have some book crushes. Like probably one of my biggest right now is Kaladin from the Stormlight Archive. I read the Stormlight Archive series last year, so it doesn't count for this question, but yeah, every time Kaladin came on page I was like giggling and kicking my feet because I love him. But some that I have really enjoyed are, firstly, I think Lucas from Deep End. Lucas has been so far one of my favorite of Ali Hazelwood's male protagonists. I sometimes find that her male protagonists are really hit or miss for me. I really didn't enjoy either Adam from The Love Hypothesis or Nolan from Check and Mate, largely because I didn't really feel like they had a lot of character and personality outside of the relationships that they were in. Whereas Lucas, as well as Lo from Bride, and then principally Jack from Love Theoretically. Jack is like probably one of the few exceptions to my like I don't have crushes on romance characters, but yeah, Jack is like my perfect like boyfriend. He's I just love him so much. And I also did quite enjoy Levi, who is from Love on the Brain as well, and that I haven't yet read Not in Love or the newest Bug Problematic Summer yet, but I'm looking forward to both of those. But with Deep End, I really liked Lucas. I feel like he is probably my second favorite to Jack, and I felt like there was a lot of similarities between their characters, and I did really like how Lucas was given his own storyline to follow within Deep End. It obviously wasn't as big as Scarlet's storyline, but I still felt like Lucas was established to be his own character, and I really liked their relationship between them as well. Another one that I did enjoy was William from Rivalry of Hearts as well, of an interesting character. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Astarion from Baldur's Gate. He also fits in the same mold as, I would say, Cardan from the Cruel Prince series, who is another one that I do have a crush on, so. And then, if we're counting, like, non-traditionally published books as well, there is this game called Romance Club, which is basically visual novels, and there's one story called Heaven's Secret Requiem, and there is a character named Dimitri in that, and the way I'm obsessed with this man is like ridiculous. All like other fictional crushes like pale in comparison to the chokehold that this man has on me, this hunk of pixels, you know. He's just, you know. I also really liked Malbonte from the Heaven's Secret and Heaven's Secret 2 series. I'm really obsessed with Romance Club at the moment, and Similar to the one before, the next question is, what are your newest favorite characters? I would say Edwina from Rivalry of Hearts is another one of my favorites. I really enjoyed the romance in that one, and I loved both of the characters. I felt like they were both really relatable, but I think Edwina in particular spoke to a lot of experiences that I've had. She's, an aspiring author, and so I would say a character that is kind of like coded to be very neurodivergent, specifically autistic, and those are a lot of traits that I relate to as well. So I really enjoyed reading from her perspective, and I think she's just such a funny character because she was just so like aloof of a lot of things going around her, and I just found her really endearing. Another character that I really loved was Macely Donor from Sunrise and the Reaping. Macely is one of the tributes that is reaped alongside Haymitch and is kind of his closest friend of the group of tributes, and we know about Macely from the books earlier, like the original Hunger Games series, and I always did quite enjoy her. There was like this fan-made Hunger Games film a couple of years ago that I remember really enjoying, so I have always quite liked Macely's character, but I really liked the exploration of her character in this more. She's a very snarky and sarcastic character, and I find in a way that it was really impactful in the story that is all about violence and systematic violence in particular, about her sort of rebelling through her actions and just her more flippant attitude towards a lot of things. And there's also some like great memes online about, I feel like I've just loved the kind of fan community around her as well, and I can't wait to see how she is portrayed within the film adaptation coming up, because she's being portrayed by McKenna Grace, who I feel like is one of the most like popular like child stars, so I feel like it's really interesting to see her in a more adult role. The casting for this movie in particular is just like insane. Like Elle Fanning as so good. And then another character that I really loved is Lynn Castor from Swordcatcher. I talked about Swordcatcher a bit earlier, and Lynn has so far been my favorite character in that. Really loved her storyline. She is from a persecuted minority group, and there's a lot of discrimination that she faces both outside her community and both within her community as well, because within her community there are a lot of restrictions on what women can and cannot do. There is also those restrictions in just Castellane at large, especially amongst its upper classes, but Lynn in particular really struggles to pursue her career in medical studies because of restrictions placed on her by people in charge in her community. And I just really love the perseverance and dedication that Lynn has, and also just the care and compassion that she has for her friends. I feel like she's a really headstrong character, but also one who has flaws and is a really interesting character to follow, and I really enjoyed the themes and discussions that Cassandra Clare went in when discussing her character, because Ari is based around Jewish history, which Cassandra Clare herself is Jewish, and I felt like the investigation of those themes of discrimination and how it is informed by the actual lived experience of Jewish people throughout history is really interesting to read about, and I've just really enjoyed Lynn's character for that perspective. The next question was, what are some books that made you cry? I feel like I don't have many, but I do have a couple. Sunrise and the Reaping, of course, I think is pretty self-explanatory. I don't think a lot of people can get through this book without crying, because it is about, the literal death of children, and a lot of these characters we grow fond of as the story goes on, and my heart just breaks for Haymitch going through these events of the novel, and also just for the characters who have these really horrible things happening to them as well, which obviously Haymitch is one of them. Deep End by Ellie Hazelwood is also another book that made me really emotional, because we're following our main character Scarlett, who is like a diver, and she basically went through a really traumatic injury and is sort of struggling with her mental health, both regarding her career as a diver and also just for other aspects of her life. And I myself was going through the same process and still am, and so I really related to a lot of the experiences that Scarlett was going through, and so it made me quite emotional to read through some of the thoughts and feelings that she was having, because it echoed a lot of the sentiments that I myself was having. On a similar note, there are two memoirs that I also read this year that really made me emotional. The first one is called House of My Mother by Sherry Frankie. This is Sherry Frankie Frankie is the daughter of Ruby Frankie, who was the woman who ran the 8 Passengers YouTube channel, rather popular family vlogging channel, and there was a pretty big case made against Ruby Frankie about child abuse that was largely directed towards Sherry's younger siblings. But this book at large is just an exploration of abusive households and abusive family dynamics, and is a really emotional read, and is one that has also resonated with me as someone who also grew up in an abusive household. So this one was definitely very emotional, but I feel like the thoughtfulness and depth that Sherry was able to discuss was really well done, and just really resonated with my experience with those same struggles as well. And then another book that I really enjoyed was Strong Female Character by Fern Brady, a memoir by Fern Brady, who is a Scottish comedian, and she is reflecting on her childhood and her childhood experiences in the light of her diagnosis as autistic as an adult. And this is one that really resonates with me as someone currently going through this process as well, of trying to reconcile my past with things that I know now about my identity, specifically regarding suspecting that I have autism. So I really enjoyed this story, but you know, there's a lot of really heart-wrenching moments and things that are kind of said and done that I really resonated with and really made me emotional, because it's sort of in-depth explorations of yourself and your identity and sort of trying to navigate the world in light. Question was, what is a book that made you happy? And A Rivalry of Hearts was probably the most happy-go-lucky book I read. This one is a very like funny book in terms of like it's following these two characters who are rival authors who have to compete for a publishing deal while on a book tour with one another, and one of them writes smutty fae romance book, poet and whatnot. So there's a lot of really funny details there. I think like taking this approach of like bringing a more modern author scene to like a fantasy world, and also just having kind of fun with it. Like the two characters have these really silly nicknames for each other, which are Willie and Weenie, which I think really sets the tone for just what goes on in this book. I just really liked it. I really liked the romance between these two characters as well. Another one that I really liked was Legends and Librarians. This was one of the first ARC books that I read so far this year, and I really enjoyed it. It's sort of in the same like cozy fantasy vein as a lot of other books that I've read. This one in particular is focused around books, and there's like library spirits that kind of like help out, and I thought that was a really cute aspect, and I just really liked how the magic system was built around like books and like loving books and stuff like that, and I thought the romance was pretty solid as well. The next question asks, what are some of the most beautiful books that you have received this year? And I am lucky enough to be subscribed to the Fairy Loot box, and so far this year I think the picks and the designs for the Fairy Loot books have all been like amazing so far. Like I really haven't been disappointed with any of the ones that I've received, but there is one that I think so far has been like a very clear winner for me at least, and that is Air Storms by Lauren Hamilton Murray. This is actually one that just got released, but I feel like this cover, the sprayed edges, you know, like everything about this book is just gorgeous to me. It's really reminds me of like those cartoon like Barbie movies that I used to watch as a kid. Like this feels like, you know, you're going to read a book that's like Barbie Mermaidia. So I just really love this design. I feel like it's really gorgeous. I love the end papers as well on it. So for me, I feel like this one is a pretty clear winner, though I have also shown a couple of my other Fairy Loot editions that I think are really nice. Cruel is the Light and The Rose Bargain I think are also both really gorgeous as well. And I feel like all the picks for Fairy Loot so far this year have just been really well done. The April pick as well I think was really pretty, and so was both the May ones that I received. And I'm also just really looking forward to what they do for the rest of the year. So I have some more Fairy Loot unboxing videos on my channel, so you can go look at those if you want to see more of those books. Another one that this is just the standard edition covers, but I just really want to shout out these covers in particular, and it's the Married to Magic series by Elise Kova. I did briefly mention Elise Kova before when I talked about Arcana Academy, but yeah, I just really love these covers. This is the 5th book, which is called A Dawn with the Wolf Knight. I'm currently still on the 4th book, which is called A Do It with a Siren Duke, but I just love the this art style. It reminds me a lot of those like 90s and early 2000s historical romance oil painting covers, like the Fabio covers, but like made fantasy. And so I just love that of merging those two aspects with the fantasy romance covers. I think Emma Ham also has some really nice ones that I like as well, but I have not purchased any of them. Talking about these covers, the Married to Magic series I believe is going to be traditionally published, so I would highly recommend, if you do like these covers, to try and get these editions. I'm actually somewhat contemplating whether or not I want to get the hardcovers, even though I have all the other ones, because they have these like cool designs underneath that I think are really pretty. And then there are some like little character arts as well. I just really like these books and these covers, so I just wanted to give a shout out. The cover artist is Erin Mako, and then the character portraits are by Merwild. So please support the artists and those are the books because I think they're stunning. And then the next question is need to read by the end of the year, and I actually have a very long list of this because I did like a 25 books that I need to read in 2025 list at the beginning of the year. I did film a video for that, but I never ended up posting it because by the time that I got around to editing it, it was like March. But some of the ones that I did have on there that I pulled out are The Scarlet Veil by an author called Shelby Mahurin. She also wrote a series called Serpent and Dove that I really enjoyed, and this one is supposedly about vampires. I believe the second book in this one series came out this year as well, so I would really like to get to this. Actually 3 copies of this book, so that's why I really need to get to it, because why do I have 3 copies of a book I've never read? That's kind of ridiculous. Another one that I really like to get to is Iron Gold by Pierce Brown. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Like, this is book 4 in a series, and I really enjoyed the first 3 books, and I read them back in 2022. It's been like over 3 years now since I read them, and like I haven't continued with it, largely because there are some things that happen in the series that I don't want to read, because, you know, my favorite character dies, so I'm not going to say who my favorite character is, so I don't spoil it for others. And to make it worse, like, it was the author themselves who spoiled it, because when the 6th book was coming out, he basically was like, I just wrote the hardest character death, and I automatically just was like, I know it's gonna be my favorite character. And then when I received my edition of the book, there was some damage on the back, so I was looking at the back of it and then turned to the last page of the author's note where he was like, oh, you know, I had to kill this character, and I was like, are you kidding me? So I had it like fully spoiled, so that kind of just killed all motivation to read this. And I think that was maybe 2 years ago that 6th book came out. And yeah, the series is gonna be, I think it's actually gonna be ending next year. I'm not 100% sure on when it's coming out, but given that I have to read 3 books to get to that one, and all 3 books are pretty big, I would like to at least get to this one. And I do feel like once I read this one, I'm gonna want to read 5 and 6 immediately, just because that's how it was when I initially read the first trilogy. That I really need to get to is The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams. This was one of the series from Broken Binding, so it's another special edition series that I have. Either 3 books in the series that are sometimes 2 books, because book 3 is sometimes split into 2 parts based on the binding. So Broken Binding decided to do it as 4, which I kind of agree with more, because these books are all this big. And what do you mean? It should have been 2 books this length. Like, that's kind of crazy. That's kind of crazy in my opinion. But this is, like, I think a really big and hyped, like, epic fantasy series, and it's also one that I've been looking forward to reading for a long time, because one of my favorite series of all time is the Game of Thrones series, and the Dragonbone Chair series is one that really inspired George R.R. Martin to write Game of Thrones. And on top of that, the Dragonbone Chair series is actually finished, unlike Game of Thrones, so, you know, that's a plus. I love finished series instead of ones that have, you know, pending completion for, you know, a decade now, you know. Kind of ridiculous in my opinion. A couple as well, like I mentioned, the Dawn with the Wolf Knight. So I'd really like to continue with the Married to Magic series. Another one that I like to read is Crooked Kingdom. I'd like to continue with the Serpent and the Wings of Night series by Carissa Broadbent. I'd like to read really any of my Fairy Loot books as well, are all like ones that I would like to read, because I do pay a lot of money to keep that subscription. So, and then the long-awaited last question is favorite book to movie adaptation. And And this one is probably the most difficult question because I don't really watch movies or TV shows, so I honestly don't have one that I have watched. However, one that I am interested in is We Were Liars, which recently came out with a TV show. I also mentioned Sunrise on the Reaping being one of my favorite books, but I think it will be next year. And then another one that I'm really excited for, which maybe it's stretching the book prompt a little bit too much, but is also Fantastic Four First Steps, which is based on obviously the Marvel comic books of Fantastic Four. I've recently been really obsessed with the game Marvel Rivals, and my favorite character to play has been Invisible Woman or Sue Storm, one of the characters from the Fantastic Four. I loved the Fantastic Four movies when I was a kid, so I'm really excited to see this new interpretation, and also, you know, I just get to look at Pedro Pascal in an air-conditioned movie theater with, you know, a Diet Coke and popcorn. Like, honestly, that seems like a damn good time, in my opinion. So, like, I'm very excited for Fantastic Four, and I know a lot of other people are as well. That officially brings us to the end of the Mid-Year Freakout Tag, and I hope that you enjoyed watching this video and enjoyed hearing my thoughts about some of the books that I've read and some of the books that I look forward to reading as well. I would also love to hear what your answers to any of these questions are, so feel free to just drop them below, or just, you know, let me know what your best book was, or, you know, some of your reading goals looking forward. Thank you once again for watching this video, and I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you liked my answers to these questions. I know that people sometimes have some divided opinions, so which is perfectly fine. Thank you for watching this video, and goodbye.